Welcome to State of the World. I'm Sally Lockwood in Dubai.
And I'm Ryan Heath, joining from New York for Tara Palmeri again, and very pleased to be back.
Great to have you back again so soon, Ryan. What a bonus. We weren't expecting to have 2 weeks in a row, but it does mean Tara can have a little bit more of a breather on holiday. Thanks for joining us again. Did you enjoy last week?
I absolutely loved it and loved the feedback I've been getting from all of you who were listening. So thank you very much.
Yeah, great. Well, we've loved it. And it means I get to exploit your big brain again. There's so much to talk about, as there always is. And it's been a really big week when it comes to Ukraine. Donald Trump's announcement at the White House with Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, was really, really good news for Ukraine and, you know, a shot across the bow for Vladimir Putin.
We are very unhappy, I am, with Russia, but we'll discuss that maybe a different day. But we're very, very unhappy with them, and we're going to be doing very severe tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. But we've made a deal today where we are going to be sending them weapons, and they're going to be paying for them.
So Trump may be the last person on the planet to realize you can't trust what Putin says in a negotiation or an informal chat on the phone. But that is good news for Ukraine. And the NATO members have been stepping up. They have a completely different set of aspirations for defense spending now. So I think that Trump genuinely feels that he's getting more out of the bargain from the European NATO members, which means he can start putting the thumb on the scale for Ukraine a little bit more. And of course, he promised he was going to wrap this up, in a day or two when he returned to office. And, maybe we might see some progress in 50 days' time, which is that end of summer deadline he's now set for Putin.
I find it really interesting, though, that, as you say, Donald Trump is realizing that diplomacy is not quite as simple as he thought it was. He hasn't managed to create peace in Ukraine in 24 hours, as he, famously championed on the campaign. And here we are, a war that's lasted nearly 3.5 years now. It's just got worse and worse for Ukrainian civilians.
Plus the first 8 years, Sally. Ukrainians will tell you it's an 11-year war.
You're right, Ryan. There was the 2014 invasion of Crimea, but then this all-out invasion of the entire country began 3 years, 4 months ago, I think. But what's really interesting, let's talk first about Donald Trump's change in tone towards Putin, and then we'll get on to the billions of dollars of weapons that Donald Trump is now sending to Ukraine via NATO and why that's significant. Let's just remind ourselves of how Donald Trump was speaking about Putin back in February. Take a listen.
When Putin says that he really wants peace, do you believe him?
Yeah, I do. I believe he wants peace. I believe that President Putin, when I spoke to him yesterday, I know him very well. Yeah, I think he wants peace. I think he would tell me if he didn't. I'd like to see peace.
Do you trust President Putin?
I believe that, I believe that he would like to see something happen. I trust him on this subject.
So there you go, Ryan. Back in February, he, trusted Putin. He said, I think he wants peace. I trust him on this subject. It's so interesting, isn't it? Because even back then, there were so many observers, including allies like Europe, who thought the complete opposite, that you can't trust Putin as far as you can throw him, and that he says one thing and does another. We've seen it so many times. It feels like the penny has only now finally dropped for Donald Trump. Why has it taken so long?
Well, this is a man who's used to high-stakes Manhattan real estate deals. Yes, that might involve $1 billion or $2 billion. You do get to play people off against each other and often come out a winner, or you run down the clock against the regulators and the others who might be trying to force you to live by certain standards or pay certain sums of money. It's completely different when you're dealing with a nuclear power, and that's what he's dealing with Vladimir Putin, a man who felt burned by the West for decades and who has played a very long game in trying to extract revenge against both Ukraine and the broader Western world. So this is just not what Donald Trump has spent his career dealing with. And so I don't want to use terms like met his match, but it's just a different scale of behavior. It's a different threat that is backing up the behavior. And Donald Trump is just starting to realize that you have to play a bit tougher if you want something in that situation.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because for so many months now, there's been a lot of critique saying, Donald Trump is just being played by Putin. And certainly he himself acknowledged that this week when he said, oh, he's really pleasant on the phone, and then bombs go off at night. So I think, the penny has finally dropped. Do you think there was a naivety there from Donald Trump, or do you think it's just that, as so many observers have described him for a long time now, is that he's actually just quite an admirer of Vladimir Putin?
Well, yes, we know that Trump has these tendencies to want to accumulate power, to present himself as the grand central orchestrator of whatever is going on in American politics. He loves the theater of all of that. And that's what Putin is good at in his country as well. But I think it's a double naivety. He was naive about Putin, and he was naive about the value of NATO. There is a reason why that alliance existed and has endured for 75 years now. And that's because it really does help to have friends. And you're not going to have those friends if you just, I don't know what words I can use on this podcast, but if you are, if you're going to be unfriendly to your friends, there is prices to be paid for that as well. And he's starting to realize, actually, you might want to drive a hard bargain with NATO, but you still need to bargain with them. You still need that alliance.
Yeah. And I also thought it was really interesting that, he said the talk with Putin essentially doesn't mean anything because, he says one thing and then you see another. And he drew on Melania, his wife, as someone who has made him focus on this, who's drawn his attention to certain news stories. Let's have a listen to what he said about Melania.
I go home, I tell the First Lady, I spoke to Vladimir today. We had a wonderful conversation. She said, oh, really? Another city was just hit. So it's like, look, he's... I don't want to say he's an assassin, but he's a tough guy. It's been proven over the years. He's fooled a lot of people.
I found that a really interesting insight, that she potentially has a lot more influence over her husband than many perhaps realized.
I think that people underestimate Melania. She is someone who plays a long game herself. She plays her cards in a very discreet manner. But, Donald Trump trusts her. If she wants to speak up on something, he knows that she is saying what she really thinks and providing a sort of important reality check to him sometimes. She's not just gratuitously trying to position herself or her personal views every day in the Trump White House. She's barely in the Trump White House. But she's someone who grew up in Europe during communism. She lived in that gray zone around the Iron Curtain. Her parents still have strong links back to her native Slovenia. She does follow this news. She does understand it. And she has a visceral understanding and, at some level, empathy for Ukraine that a lot of people in MAGA world simply haven't had because they're Americans who grew up under American prosperity. So, yeah, Melania can have a difference here.
Yeah, absolutely. Being Slovenian, she has a unique viewpoint because she, I'm sure, still has family and friends back there who are very concerned about this, being an Eastern European country. Let's talk now about NATO and the relationship there and how this is all going to work. So Donald Trump has said, we are going to send billions of dollars worth of weapons to Ukraine, but actually, no, we're going to send them via NATO and NATO has to buy them from us.
So that's the transaction there, isn't it? Trump has always argued that European NATO members have been freeloading off the US. And so this is a way to make Europe pay for a solution in Ukraine. And that is his broader game here. So on the one hand, he's gone ahead with all of this NATO-Ukraine news over the past week. And in absolute parallel split screen, he's slapping a 30% tariff on all EU countries. And that is him driving a hard bargain. It's like, okay, I'll come to the table. I will be more helpful, but you are going to pay a price for it. We are going to do a support for Ukraine on my terms. So it's very clear that this is all still transactional. But, at the same time, it is ultimately what Ukraine needs and what the EU and NATO have wanted. But military procurement never works to the budget and the timeline that people imagine. So this isn't a matter of hours or days. This is a matter of weeks or months. And in the past, it has been years before some of these materials have turned up in Ukraine. So we've got to keep a careful watch on the actual supply chain and what is actually happening, not just the nice words in front of the cameras.
I thought the EU foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, comments were really interesting. She said, well, if you're selling us the weapons, I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, it's not really you giving the support, is it? If we're having to buy them from you in order to distribute them to the battlefield, it's not your support here, it's European support. So essentially, don't dress it up as Donald Trump rolling in to save the day for Ukraine. But it is interesting that Mark Rutte was quite happy for him to frame it like that in the announcement in the Oval Office, that this is all about Donald Trump being the center of attention. He's the one who's doing the deal here. He's saving Ukraine. He's sending them what they need. They're getting the Patriot systems. But actually, he made this announcement. And then now European officials are scrambling to work out exactly what this means. There was an interesting report by Reuters that senior European officials in embassies in Washington learnt about this in real time in that Oval Office press conference. And that so often is the case with Donald Trump, is that he'll make a big statement about something happening, and then the actual detail takes a lot of time to catch up with the outcome.
Yep, that's absolutely right. But what Kaja Kallas and Mark Rutte and others have to remember, are trying to remember, it seems sometimes, they're in their 40s and 50s. They're going to be around performing these politics, being involved in this sort of diplomacy for years, maybe decades after Donald Trump is no longer with us. So let him have his theater, let him have his piece, because that's what's got him to the table, the ability to sort of insert himself and take credit here. And he needs it right now. So he's got like strong motivation to keep doing it. We've seen the MAGA movement very split over this Jeffrey Epstein issue and what are the files that are being released around it. And Trump needs to offer something to those Reagan and Bush conservatives who are very loosely affiliated with him at the moment. He needs to hold some form of coalition together, and supporting Ukraine in this way and putting his ego at the center of it is the way to make this happen. So I think the Europeans need to do what Mark Rutte was doing. They need to smile, accept it, press him for it, keep him accountable, but just let him be the center of attention for a little while, and they'll get what they need out of this situation.
It's really interesting as well that he's threatened Russia with this 50-day deadline and said, if you haven't come to the table for a ceasefire deal within 50 days, we're going to slap you with 100% tariffs. Oh, and we'll also slap those tariffs on your friends who buy Russian oil. So that's China, India, Turkey. But I spoke to a source today who is very well swept up in what is happening in Russia. And they said to me that actually, tariffs on Russia won't really make any material difference because there's only $3 billion of trade that America does with Russia. And so 100% tariffs on that really won't hurt Russia very much. But the tariffs being applied to their customers, their oil customers, could make a real difference in terms of them applying pressure on Russia to come to the table.
It's the only card left because you're right. After the original full-scale invasion of Ukraine, all of the trade taps were turned off, not just by the US, but by Europe, once they were able to wean themselves off the oil and gas from Russia. So really, it is all that secondary sanction stuff that will make the difference. And of course, he's just made up this 50-day deadline because that's when Americans will be coming back from their vacations. The Labor Day long weekend takes place in the first weekend in September. And once Americans are back at their desks or watching the evening news again, or wherever it is that they get the news and they're focusing on politics again, this is one mess he has to have cleaned up because he needs to be able to refocus on China. He can't constantly have his attention diverted to Ukraine, to the Middle East. Like, China's the real game for Trump, and he wants to be able to focus on it again in the autumn, in the fall.
Well, we've been focusing this week on what was said in the White House, Ryan, and what that means for Ukraine, what that means for Russia. And of course, it's super important. The reality on the ground for Ukrainians really doesn't feel any different at all. I spoke to people in Ukraine this week who said, we didn't even tune in for the announcement because we just don't trust it anymore. We don't believe that anything is going to change for us. And I've spoken to people there who are now using the bomb shelters for the first time in 3 years, in more than 3 years, because they feel so vulnerable. And the reason they feel so at risk is because of these drone attacks that are terrorizing Ukrainian civilians at night. Take a look at this video that one person sent me. This is the view from their balcony. And it is like this most nights. Those flashes that you can see flying upwards are the air defense systems flying out to, take out drones and missiles that are being sent in from Russia. And up to 1,000 Shahed drones, they're called, are being fired into Ukraine every night. And they are hitting cities all over the country. And people are talking to me about how not only the fact that they are feeling demoralized, that was one word that was used, but they're feeling terrified. They lie in bed and they can hear the sound of these drones flying because they're at quite low level. And there's a distinct buzz, a distinct noise to them, so that in a way that you wouldn't hear with a ballistic missile. And they, jump out of their beds and they run into the corridor and they, try and get to a place of safety because people fear now that it's going to hit their apartment block.
Mhm.
And it's the indiscriminate nature of these drone attacks that is really terrorizing civilians. And the other word that is repeatedly used when I ask people how they are, how they're doing, is exhausted, tired. They're
Mhm.
tired. Imagine not having a night's sleep where it's not broken every night by air raid sirens or by the sound of explosions. And they've had that for more than 3 years. And I think the fear among a lot of Ukrainians is that Donald Trump has given Vladimir Putin this 50-day deadline, and that they think in those 50 days he's going to use that as a window to just unleash. And they're expecting things to get worse, not better. So I think but for Ukrainian civilians, that's their reality. And I think sometimes that's forgotten when we're talking about the politics of all of this, is that, it's a very long war and they don't see an end in sight. So let's see. If this military hardware reaches the front line, that will be fantastic. And obviously that's been really welcomed in Kyiv. But it's just how long it's going to take for that hardware to get there, because the summer fighting season is the toughest bit of the year. And there is a concern that what they really need won't make it to the front line until after the summer. But let's see.
And we should all be paying attention to that, because Ukraine has been a test bed for the future of warfare. So what is happening in Ukraine, these new forms of total warfare, the psychological warfare, combined with the cyber attacks, combined with all the conventional weapons, like that's the sort of thing that is on the table if China really was to go ahead and invade Taiwan, for example. And the Taiwanese are very alert to that and have been running their biggest ever military exercises over the past 10 days, preparing for that exact sort of threat.
Wow. Meanwhile, exactly, while the world's looking over here, China's ramping up its, potential plans to invade Taiwan. Who knows? But certainly their incursions of the Taiwan Strait have become increasingly frequent. They've also been carrying out more frequent military exercises over Taiwanese or close to Taiwanese airspace. So yeah, you're right, Ryan. What else do we need to talk about this week? There's been a big story in the UK when it comes to Afghanistan. Have you seen that?
I have, yes. Wow. I'm almost speechless when you look at the details of that. The sharing of the names of 25,000 Afghans that helped allied forces, essentially by accident, getting into the wrong hands.
Yeah, so for people who aren't familiar with this story, Ryan, there was the change of power from the previous Afghan administration to the Taliban back in August 2021. So the Taliban took control of Afghanistan, and the US and the UK, in a real hurry, in a lot of chaos, tried to evacuate as many people as they could who felt at risk from the Taliban because they'd worked with the US or the British or NATO troops during the war. And they did manage to evacuate tens of thousands of them. I think America took in nearly 80,000 Afghans, and the British took in around 36,000 in the scheme that they had to bring people to safety and offer them refuge in the UK. And then there were a number of people that weren't evacuated who remained in Afghanistan. And there was a list, a spreadsheet that was leaked on an email containing the names of nearly 20,000 Afghans who were at risk because they had worked for these countries, either as, translators or contractors, there were cleaners, cooks, drivers. There were lots of Afghans who worked helping Americans and British and NATO troops during the war. I actually worked with a number of interpreters who helped me when I was working over there covering the war in Afghanistan. And they worked very closely with British and American troops and Danish troops. And they were considered very much part of the team. The ones that I worked with wore a British Army uniform. They took the same risks. They were out on foot patrols on the battlefield with the British military. They lived together, they ate together, they slept together. And so I think there was a lot of concern about their fate after the Taliban took control of the country. They were not going to be any friend of the Taliban. And the UK and America did try and, among other nations, did try and evacuate as many of those people as possible. They didn't manage to evacuate everyone. And this list contained the names of others who were still in the country. So nearly 20,000 of them were on this list. And if you included their family members, the number rose to around 100,000. Now, this became clear a while ago, but it went to the UK courts because of the concern that this list could be made public and could get into the hands of the Taliban, and that these people's lives would be at risk. And so the British courts took a very unusual step of giving the government a super injunction to prevent media companies from reporting on this story. Do you have super injunctions in the States?
Not to the same extent. It's a uniquely British thing. You have other
Okay.
quirks in the American legal system where a local court essentially can issue a nationwide injunction that stops a certain policy. But the free speech amendment in the US Constitution would never allow something like a super injunction, which just sort of prevents the discussion of even the existence of this idea, this list, this court case. Like everyone is silenced from being able to talk about it in the UK system. And that doesn't really exist here.
Yeah, so a super injunction prevents the publication or reporting of the details or the material in question. But it's so strict, unlike a normal injunction, you can't even acknowledge or report the existence of this injunction. And when the data breach came to light in 2023, the UK government took this very rare step of going to the UK courts to get this super injunction. And they did this because they were concerned about the fate of the individuals on this list still being in Afghanistan, and that there could be reprisals from the Taliban. So while the super injunction was in place, they set up a secret route to try and bring some of these people to safety in the UK. Some have been relocated to the UK under this scheme, but it's understood up to 80,000 people who have been put at risk by this data breach are still potentially in Afghanistan. So, it's been an extraordinary story, a lot of criticism and outrage, but also a lot of concern about the Afghans who could still be in Afghanistan and what could happen to them. And of course, there was a lot of criticism of the Trump administration for their handling of the airstrikes on Yemen by exchanging classified information on that messaging app, Signal. And here we have an extraordinary data breach by the UK government. What's been the reaction in the US to it, Ryan?
Yeah, I think in insider circles, people find it jaw-dropping, but everything about that evacuation was jaw-dropping. It's widely considered to have been bungled. People who care about these things, who follow it on a day-to-day basis, or who are involved in this 20-year war and campaign against terror and the Taliban, they find it abhorrent that any of this was happening in the first place. And then to have the life-threatening insult being added to all the previous injuries, like it's not received well, but it hasn't broken into mainstream debate. Had it been a US list and the US refugee and asylum program that was causing the problem, yes, it would have been a major discussion. But it's kind of containerized as a British problem and a British issue, albeit one with a multi-billion-dollar price tag by the sounds of it.
Yeah, I mean, it does sound very expensive. I think the numbers have been exaggerated from what I've read. They were discussing billions of pounds worth of costs in bringing these people to safety in the UK. At the moment, I think it's around $1 billion from what I've read, or it will end up being about $1 billion. But there's also now a lot of speculation that the people on this list now have grounds to sue the UK government.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which will end up being extremely expensive. So, the person who sent this email with this list attached outside of the government group working on this program is apparently still employed, but has been removed from their role. Pretty bad day at work. But when we're talking about lists, Ryan, clearly that was a list that the UK probably wishes didn't exist, especially in that format. Yeah. The Epstein list has also provoked a lot of discussion in the US. What's the latest on that?
Well, I am not deep into MAGA world, but we have all had MAGA's division surface to us this week, because this was really a kind of core tenet of those people who were at more of the conspiracy theorist end of the Trump coalition. They absolutely believed there's a black and white list of powerful names that Jeffrey Epstein kept as his clients and associates. They believed that these were people high up in the Democratic Party or the liberal elite, let's say. And by finding and surfacing and publishing this list, the sort of pedophilic tendencies of all the people that this coalition hates were going to be revealed to the world, and they were going to be able to righteously say that they're the only people Americans can trust to run the government. Now, it turns out the list doesn't really exist at all in that format that has been imagined. And despite the best wishes of Trump world, they've had to acknowledge that. Otherwise, the list, if it really did exist in that format, it would be out by now. And the level of division that's occurred over the past week around this is something that we haven't really seen over any other substantial policy issues. And those of us who aren't deep in that world might kind of be like, well, this is a side issue. Who cares about this? Like, of course it wasn't real. That's not the way people in this movement feel. And so they're going to go to the barricades over this and continue to try and surface this list and continue to give Trump grief over it. And that, to circle back to our original discussions, it's why he needs to find some more slightly mainstream friends, all those people who sort of gritted their teeth and voted for him because they wanted the lower taxes or whatever last year. He needs to keep them in the tent now while these MAGA divisions occur. And that's why, or one of the reasons why he's suddenly become more cooperative on defending Ukraine.
Yeah, Donald Trump being haunted from the grave by Jeffrey Epstein, and also being haunted by his previous administration partner, Elon Musk, who also published that very famous tweet where he said that Donald Trump was in the Epstein files. There's not been a lot more said on that, has there?
Well, I mean, that is kind of the third rail, really, isn't it? Trump and Epstein did have a relationship going back over a decade before all of the original allegations were investigated in Florida, before the eventual prosecution occurred. So those two men knew each other dating back to the previous century. And of course, were any of those links to be substantiated in new or disturbing ways, that would be a really big problem for Trump.
Interesting that Donald Trump never served Elon Musk with any legal response to that tweet.
There's a bit of mutually assured destruction in this relationship. It doesn't mean that it goes away, but you've got at one level the most armed and most powerful man in the world, and on another level the richest man, and they each know where a lot of bodies and treasure are buried in each other's lives. So, that's what makes it great theater, but there's also some sense that neither really wants to take the other down totally.
Yeah, it's a high stakes game. Never a dull moment though, Ryan. Thanks so much for bringing us up to speed on all the chaos and craziness from the States.
That is the state of our world, Sally. I want to say it's been a pleasure. It's not really a pleasure in the capital P sense, but it has been interesting, and I appreciate the chance to talk about it all.
You make it as pleasurable as it can be, Ryan. Thanks so much. We'll see you again soon. Thanks so much for standing in again for Tara. I really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed this episode, please do hit like, leave a comment, share it with your friends, and please do subscribe to us as well. It's totally free and it makes a big difference to how the channel grows. Thanks for watching. Tara and I will see you again next week.